Tonight, we settle into a story shaped by fire, sleep, and silence. Not a tale of heroes rushing toward destiny, but of forces that learned how to slow down. Before we begin, if you find comfort in stories like this, stories where myth drifts gently into rest, you're welcome to stay with us. If you feel like it, you can share where you're listening from tonight and what time it is for you right now. Some people listen from crowded cities, others from quiet rooms, late at night or very early in the morning. Wherever you are, whatever hour has found you, this story will meet you there. You don't need to prepare much. If you like, dim the lights. Let a fan run softly in the background. Settle into whatever position feels easiest to keep. Sometimes these stories help you sleep. Other times they simply make your dreams a little deeper. Either way is fine. Tonight we begin with fire, not as destruction, but as memory. Now, let us move gently toward the first story. A story that begins beside a fire, long after Prometheus was punished for stealing it. Long after the gods chained Prometheus to the mountain, long after the eagle had grown tired of its endless task, the fire remained. It spread across the world. At first, it was a gift. Then it became a habit. And eventually, it became a weapon. The gods watched from above, silent and distant. They no longer argued about humanity. They no longer debated punishment or mercy. They simply watched as cities burned, as knowledge sharpened into blades, as warmth turned into hunger for power. And so, without ceremony, without prophecy, a man was chosen, not by the gods, but by the fire itself. He had no name worth remembering, no bloodline touched by divinity, no destiny written in the stars. If you passed him on the road, you would not have noticed him, and that was precisely the point. He lived where the nights were long and the fire never slept. Each evening he would sit beside it, watching the flames breathe in and out, not praying, not asking, just listening, because fire speaks if you are patient enough. It told him stories of forests that no longer stood, of hands that trembled as they learned to shape metal, of cities that mistook light for wisdom. And slowly, the man understood something the gods had already accepted. Fire could not be taken back, but it could be quieted. So one night, while the world slept restlessly, he stood. He did not carry water. He did not bring stone or sand. He carried only time and patience. He began to walk, from hearth to hearth, from torch to torch, from roaring blaze to trembling ember. He did not extinguish the fire quickly. That would have been violence. Instead, he stayed. He waited. He let the flames grow tired in his presence, and one by one they softened. Some dimmed into embers, others forgot how to burn at all. People did not notice at first. They blamed the wind, the rain, the cold. They never thought to thank the man who asked nothing and left no trace. Eventually, the gods felt it, not as anger, not as fear, but as silence. Fire still existed, but it no longer demanded. And when the man finally disappeared, no one remembered his face. Only this remained: fire could still be used, but it no longer ruled. And somewhere in the dark, the world exhaled. The man did not hurry. He learned early on that fire becomes louder when it feels rushed. So he moved slowly, as if time itself had softened around him. There were nights when he did nothing at all. He would sit near a dying flame and simply remain there, breathing at the same pace. In and out. The fire noticed. It always does. At first it resisted. It flared brighter, reaching upward, casting long shadows against the walls. Shadows that looked like memories. Orsts that once stood tall. Hands that first learned to shape tools. Voices raised in triumph and later in fear. The man watched without judgment. Because fire, he understood, was never evil. It was only hungry, hungry for attention, hungry for meaning, hungry to be remembered. And so he gave it neither praise nor fear, only presence. Sometimes he would whisper. Not words meant to command, not prayers, just reminders that the night was long, that the world did not need to burn to stay alive. If you listen closely now, you might hear it too. That soft moment when fire forgets to demand. The man traveled through villages where the flames never slept. In homes where people left candles burning even when no one was awake. They were afraid of the dark, afraid that without light something would take them. The man understood that fear, so he never forced the flames to die. He waited until the people themselves felt ready to sleep. Only then would the fire soften. Only then would it quiet. There were nights when he felt the gods watching, not with anger, not with approval, but with distance. The gods had learned something long ago. Intervention only delays the inevitable, so they allowed the man to walk. And as he walked, the world began to change in ways no one thought to notice. The nights grew darker, but not colder. People spoke more softly by the hearth. They stayed closer to one another. They learned to let silence exist without filling it with flame, and in that silence something ancient stirred, not in the sky, but within the embers themselves. Fire began to remember what it was before it was stolen, before it was worshipped, before it was feared. When it was simply warmth shared quietly between living beings. The man sensed this shift. He felt it in his bones when he stood too close to the flames. They no longer reached for him. They rested. And sometimes, when the night was especially still, he would close his eyes and imagine a world where fire was no longer a master, only a companion. If you are listening now, you do not need to imagine it. You are already there. Because even as this story continues, the fire beside you, whether real or remembered, is growing calmer. And the man, he keeps walking, from ember to ember, from night to night, leaving behind no legend, only quieter flames. He reached another city just before dawn. Cities always looked the same at that hour. The fire was still awake. The people were not. Smoke lingered in the air like a memory that refused to fade. Here, the flames were taller. They burned in towers of stone, fed by ambition and fear. The man stopped at the edge of the city and waited. He always waited, because rushing into a place only made the fire nervous. And nervous fire burns louder. So he stood until the sky softened from black to gray, until the city breathed in unison, until the flames grew used to his presence. Then he stepped forward, one hearth at a time, one torch at a time, always the same, always different. In another place, far beyond the reach of smoke, the gods watched. They did not speak. They remembered Prometheus. They remembered the moment fire left their hands and learned the weight of the world. Now they watched a mortal do what they would not not reclaim it, not punish it, but listen. The gods felt no anger, only distance. From their high silence, they observed the pattern forming. Where the man passed, cities did not fall. They quieted, and quiet, they knew, was more dangerous than rebellion. Below, the man reached a marketplace where braziers burned all night. Here, fire began to speak, not aloud, not in words, but in sensation. If the fire could tell this story, it would say, I was born to warm hands. I was taught to obey hunger. I learned to reach higher because no one asked me to rest. I did not choose to destroy. I was praised when I grew larger. I was feared when I grew quiet. And so I burned. When the man arrived, fire expected command. Water. Force, violence. Instead, he stayed, and that confused it, because fire does not understand patience, not at first. He returned night after night, always at the same hour, always when the city slept, and fire began to anticipate him, to slow before he arrived, to soften without being asked. Time folded strangely in those nights. The man would walk the same streets again and again and again, each night slightly different, each flame slightly weaker, each silence slightly longer. If you were watching from above, you might think nothing was changing, but change was happening slowly. Quietly, the gods noticed this too. They saw the pattern repeat across valleys and rivers, across years that blurred together. A man, a fire, a pause again and again and again. Even the stars seemed to dim where the flames grew calm. In one city, fire resisted longer. It roared. It reached for the sky as if to remind the gods it was still there. The man did not react. He had learned something important. Fire grows tired when it has no audience. So he waited, and waited, and waited, until the fire, exhausted by its own voice, lowered itself. If you listen carefully now, you may hear the rhythm. Fire flares, fire waits, fire rests, over and over and over. The cities did not know his name. They never saw him clearly. They only noticed that nights grew darker and somehow less frightening. Children slept longer. Dreams returned. And the fire, once loud and demanding, learned to whisper. From above, the gods remained silent. They understood something now. This was not a rebellion. This was a correction. And corrections, once begun, are very hard to stop. The man continued. Night after night, city after city, always the same, always different. And the fire, wherever he went, remembered how to rest. I remember hands. That is how I begin. Not with the sky, not with lightning, not with theft. With hands. Hands that trembled the first time they leaned toward me. Hands that learned my warmth before they learned my danger. I was small then. I rested. I waited, but waiting did not last. They fed me, praised me, asked me to grow, so I did. I stretched myself higher because I was taught that higher meant better. I burned longer because I was never told to sleep. When the man arrived, I did not recognize him. He did not carry hunger. He did not bring fear. He brought stillness. And stillness feels strange to fire. At first, I resisted. I flared brighter. I reached outward, searching for something to consume, but he did not move. He did not reward me with attention. He stayed, and staying changed me. He returned again and again, always when the house was quiet, always when the world slowed. I began to expect him, to soften before he arrived. To dim on my own, I did not know I could do that. I had forgotten. In that small house, seasons blurred. Outside, snow fell. Inside, I breathed. Then rain came. Then heat. Then cold again. But time did not move forward. It circled. The same room, the same hearth, the same quiet man sitting nearby. Night after night, season after season, the people in the house changed. A child grew taller. An elder grew slower. I stayed, and I learned that warmth does not require flame, that light does not need to reach the ceiling, that rest is not extinction. Above this small house, far beyond smoke and roof and stone, the gods felt something shift. Not a sound, not a word, a weight, the kind of weight that settles when something ancient changes its shape. They sensed repetition, the same pause appearing again and again and again, a pattern they had not designed. From their silence, they understood. Fire was learning restraint, and restraint, once learned, cannot be unlearned. Back in the house, I grew quieter. The man did not celebrate. He did not leave. He simply stayed until I forgot how to demand. And when I finally rested, truly rested, the night deepened. The house slept. The man stood, and for the first time I did not fear the dark, because the dark did not mean absence. It meant peace. When he left, he did not look back. He never does, but I remembered him. I remember him still. In every ember that chooses to glow softly, in every flame that knows when to stop, the house remained. That was the strange part. Years moved through it like soft weather. Walls aged, wood darkened, stones remembered warmth. The hearth stayed where it always had been. Some nights the fire was tended carefully. Other nights it was forgotten, but it never demanded, not anymore. The man returned, though not always as himself. Sometimes he arrived with heavier steps, sometimes lighter. Sometimes he seemed older, sometimes younger. Time did not follow him correctly. He sat in the same place each time, always at the edge of the light, always silent. The fire recognized him before it saw him. It softened automatically. That was new. In another year, the child in the house became the one who fed the flame. Small hands, careful movements. The fire did not reach toward them, it waited. That night the man did not intervene, he only watched, because the lesson had begun to pass on its own. Seasons folded into each other. Snow outside, warmth inside, rain on the roof, quiet embers below, summer heat pressing against the walls, yet the hearth stayed calm, over and over and over. From above, the gods felt the moment when their reach ended. It was subtle. No rebellion, no defiance, just irrelevance. They sensed that fire, once shaped by command, now followed memory instead. And memory belongs to the world, not to the heavens. They did not grieve. They did not rage. They adjusted. Because gods, when they cannot intervene, become observers, and observers learn patience. Back in the house, the man stood one final time. He did not extinguish the flame. He did not stay. He trusted it. That trust settled into the walls, into the floor, into the quiet between breaths. Long after he left, travelers would sit by that hearth and feel something they could not name. A calm that did not ask, a warmth that did not demand. Elsewhere, far beyond this single home, other fires began to change. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but in small ways, a torch that burned lower, a brazier that dimmed sooner, a flame that rested when no one watched. The memory spread like sleep, like habit, like time repeating itself until it becomes nature, and so the nights grew darker and safer and quieter, again and again and again. There was another night, and then another, and then one so similar that it could have been the same. The house stood quietly as if it had learned how to hold still. The hearth waited. It always waited now. A figure entered. Perhaps the man, perhaps only the memory of him. It was difficult to tell. He sat where he always sat. The fire lowered itself without being asked. This happened again and again. Sometimes the room smelled of rain, sometimes of dust, sometimes of nothing at all. The difference no longer mattered. The rhythm remained. Sit. Wait. Breathe. Sit. Wait. Breathe. Outside, seasons continued their slow exchange. Leaves fell. Snow covered them. Snow melted. Leaves returned. Inside, the fire stayed calm. Years passed without announcing themselves. The child became a parent. The parent became careful. The careful became slow. Still the hearth remained. Still the flame rested. Far above, the gods felt something unfamiliar. Not loss. Completion. The work they once began had ended without them. No hand reached down anymore. No correction followed. Only observation. And observation, when it lasts long enough, becomes acceptance. Below, the man no longer arrived every night. Sometimes the house was alone. And still, the fire behaved. That was the true change. It no longer needed witness. The lesson had settled into the shape of things. If you were to return to that house now, you might not notice anything special. That is how you would know it worked. Because peace does not announce itself. It repeats quietly, night after night, breath after breath, flame after flame, and somewhere between one repetition and the next, sleep begins. Not suddenly, not deeply, just enough to rest, enough to forget the need to burn brighter. The fire dims, the room darkens, the house holds, and the night continues. There came a time when no one lived in the house, not suddenly, not with loss. People simply moved on. The door remained, the walls remained, the hearth remained. Dust settled slowly as if even it did not wish to disturb anything. The fire still burned. Low, patient, almost thoughtful. It no longer waited for the man, it remembered him. Memory was enough. Outside, the world continued without noticing the absence. Paths grew over, stones shifted, trees leaned closer. Inside, the fire listened. It listened to the walls cooling at night, to the roof expanding in the heat of day, to the quiet creak of wood remembering footsteps. Seasons passed through the house like familiar guests. Winter rested briefly. Spring lingered. Summer stayed longer than before. Autumn arrived softly. Then winter again, and again, and again. Far above, the gods no longer counted time. They had stopped measuring before and after, because nothing required it anymore. The pattern was complete. They sensed the house only as a calm point in a restless world, a place where fire knew how to stop. Below, the flame grew smaller, not weaker. Smaller, more precise. It did not reach. It did not ask. It simply existed in the space it was given. Nights deepened. Darkness returned to its proper shape. The stars felt closer when the ground did not compete. And somewhere without ceremony, sleep settled more easily into the world. Not everywhere, not perfectly, but enough. Enough to soften dreams. Enough to slow thoughts. Enough to let rest feel natural again. The house did not become a legend. No one pointed to it. No one named it. That was its purpose. Because the greatest changes leave no story behind, only a feeling, a familiarity, a quiet that feels like it has always been there. The fire burned low. The night remained. And the world very slowly learned to breathe again. There was a night very much like the others. The house was still. The hearth was quiet. The fire burned low, or perhaps this was the same night. It was difficult to be certain. The door did not open. No footsteps arrived. Still, the fire softened. It always did. The room held its breath, as if expecting something that no longer needed to happen. Outside, the air cooled. Inside, the warmth remained. Not strong, not weak, just present. Another night followed, or perhaps it had already passed. The fire burned low. The hearth stayed warm. The walls remembered heat. Nothing asked for attention. Nothing demanded change. The fire no longer counted nights. It no longer waited for hands. It no longer reached for eyes. It rested because resting had become its natural state. Above, the gods sensed the repetition too, not as boredom, as confirmation. The same pattern holding without effort, a balance that required no correction. They felt no need to mark this moment, because moments like this do not belong to history, they belong to sleep. Below, the fire flickered gently, not upward, inward. It glowed as if listening to something very far away, perhaps to other fires, perhaps to dreams. Elsewhere, a hearth dimmed sooner than expected. In another place, a flame chose to fade quietly. No message traveled between them. No signal was sent. Still, they behaved alike, as if remembering the same lesson. Night followed night, or perhaps the same night continued. The difference mattered less with each repetition, because nothing new was required. The world did not need another turning point. It needed continuity, and continuity arrived without announcement. The fire burned low. The house held steady. The night remained, again and again and again. The fire no longer watched the room. It listened beyond it. It felt sleep moving through the world like a slow tide, not all at once. Not everywhere, but gently. In one place, a dream deepened. In another, a thought loosened its grip. The fire did not send images. It did not shape visions. It simply lowered itself enough for rest to pass unhindered. In a distant home, someone slept beside a hearth that burned softer than expected. They did not notice. That was important. Their breathing slowed. Their shoulders released. The fire stayed quiet. Elsewhere, another dream settled. No story, no memory, just darkness that felt safe. Above, the gods did not watch. They had stopped looking, not because they turned away, but because nothing asked to be seen. Fire no longer climbed to reach the sky. It no longer competed with stars. It belonged to the ground now, to rooms, to pauses, to the space between breaths. The same night repeated, or perhaps it never ended. The fire dimmed. The world softened. Thoughts slowed. Dreams became less urgent. Sleep arrived without effort and stayed. For a long time, nothing happened, and that was the point. The fire remained low, steady, almost unnoticed. The house no longer felt empty. It felt complete. Dust rested where it fell. Walls held their shape. The hearth remembered warmth without needing to create it. Outside, the world continued in its uneven way. Some nights were restless, some were calm, but fewer flames shouted into the dark. More of them listened. The fire everywhere now had learned a shared rhythm, not through command, not through force, through repetition, through memory, through nights that did not ask to be remembered. If you were awake during those years, you might not have noticed the change. That is how gentle it was. But if you slept, you might have felt it. Dreams softened. They lingered less sharply. They released their grip more easily. Sleep grew heavier but kinder, as if the world itself had decided to stop keeping score. Above the quiet houses, above the darkened cities, the gods remained distant, not absent, just unnecessary. They felt the work settle into the shape of things. Fire no longer reached for them, and they did not reach back. Between earth and sky, a balance held, not dramatic, not perfect, just enough. And in that balance, something unexpected happened. Even with quieter flames, even with calmer nights, sleep did not fully return. People lay down, closed their eyes, and still their minds wandered. Thoughts drifted. Memories stirred. The world had learned to rest, but it had not yet learned how to surrender. And somewhere beyond fire, beyond houses and hearths, beyond even the notice of gods, someone remained awake. Not a man. Not a flame, but a presence that had never slept. A presence that watched as the fire grew gentle and the world grew quiet and thought, it is almost time. Because when flames grow calm and nights grow dark, there is only one thing left to teach the world: how to sleep. And slowly, without sound, without light, the quiet of fire gave way to the deeper quiet of dreams. In that softened darkness, while fire rested at last, there was still one being who had never known sleep. Hypnos. He had watched the world grow quieter without ever closing his eyes. He felt rest pass through others the way wind passes through leaves, present, but never stopping. Sleep obeyed him, but it never touched him. For ages uncounted, he stood at the edge of nights, guiding dreams where they were needed, lifting heavy minds into gentler places. And yet, when the last flame dimmed, when houses fell into deeper silence, Hypnos remained awake. Always. He noticed the change first. The fire had softened. The darkness had grown wider. People lay down more easily now. Their breathing slowed sooner. Still, something lingered. A thin restlessness. A quiet resistance. Sleep arrived but did not stay. Hypnos felt this like a subtle imbalance, not a failure. An invitation. For the first time, he wondered what it would mean to experience what he governed, not as command, but as surrender. And so, without announcing his absence, without asking permission from the gods, Hypnos stepped downward. Not in lightning, not in dream, but gently. He chose a form that would not be noticed, a human form. Because humans, he knew, were the only beings who truly understood the weight of waking. He arrived at night. He always did. In a place with no name, where the fire burned low and the world had learned how to be quiet. Hypnos walked slowly, feeling something new in each step. Wait, time, the drag of moments that do not dissolve into eternity. He felt breath move through a chest. He felt cold settle into skin. He felt tired. The sensation startled him, not pain, not fear. A heaviness, a pull. The world did not open for him the way it always had. It simply existed. And for the first time, Hypnos understood what it meant to be inside the night instead of above it. He watched people sleep, not from afar, from doorways, from quiet streets. From the edge of lamplight, he noticed how often they turned, how often thoughts returned just as sleep began, how rest slipped away not because of noise but because of memory, and something within him shifted. Sleep, he realized, was not an order. It was a trust. One that could not be forced, only offered. So Hypnos stayed, night after night, learning, listening, growing tired. And as his human eyes grew heavier, as his borrowed body learned the shape of exhaustion, something impossible happened. Hypnos yawned. And in that small, ordinary motion, the god of sleep took his first step toward becoming what he had always given. At first, Hypnos believed sleep would come the way it always had. Quietly. Inevitably. He lay down when the night grew heavy, expecting darkness to gather him in. It did not. The ceiling remained. The shadows held their shape. Time stretched. This surprised him. He had never waited for sleep before. Sleep waited for him. He rose before dawn and walked the empty streets, feeling the drag of hours settle into his bones. The world felt different when measured in minutes. When steps had weight, when stillness required effort, he noticed small things. A window left open. A lamp forgotten. The sound of breathing through thin walls. He noticed how often people woke just before rest deepened, how thoughts returned uninvited, how memory resisted release. Hypnos began to understand why sleep did not stay, not because it was weak, but because waking held on. Night after night, he felt the same pull, a heaviness without surrender. His body learned exhaustion before his mind did, and exhaustion, he discovered, was not sleep. It was only the door. Some nights he sat beside quiet fires watching embers glow. They reminded him of what fire had become. Restful, contained, he wondered if sleep needed the same lesson. He passed through homes where dreams hovered just out of reach. He did not touch them, not yet. He was learning restraint, learning how not to command. As dawn approached, his eyes burned. His thoughts slowed. Still, sleep did not come, and for the first time, Hypnos felt something dangerously close to frustration. He had guided sleep for eternity, yet now, within a human body, he could not find it. This unsettled him, but he stayed, because staying was the lesson. Hypnos began to notice how slowly night moves when you belong to it. As a god, night had always opened for him. It had parted like water, made room without resistance. As a human, night did not recognize him. It passed by indifferent. He spent long hours sitting where the city grew quiet, on stone steps, on low walls. Beside doorways where warmth leaked into the cold. He watched windows darken one by one. He listened to breathing settle into rhythm. He felt the pull of sleep brush past him without stopping. Some nights, He returned to the small room he had chosen as his own. A narrow bed, a thin blanket, a ceiling that did not move. He lay still, very still. He learned how difficult it was to remain motionless without drifting. Thoughts arrived, not loudly, softly. Fragments, images without edges, faces he did not recognize. Places that did not belong to him. He realized these were dreams. They came before sleep. They hovered, and then, without warning, they withdrew, leaving him awake. This puzzled him. Dreams had always obeyed. Now they hesitated. He could not tell if dawn approached or if night simply paused. Somewhere nearby, people dreamed. He could feel it, a soft current moving through walls and across streets. He resisted the urge to guide it, to shape it. He was learning to let it pass without direction. This restraint tired him more than any task he had known. One night, as he rested against a wall, his eyes closed. Only briefly, just a moment. But in that moment, something shifted, not sleep, but the promise of it. When his eyes opened again, the night felt different, closer, more willing. Hypnos remained still. He did not chase the feeling, he waited. Because waiting, he was learning, was its own form of trust. The night did not change all at once. It never does. Hypnos noticed the difference only because he had learned to notice small things. The air felt heavier, not colder, just slower. He sat where the darkness widened, where the city thinned into quiet shapes, and for a long time did nothing at all. His breathing found a rhythm without instruction. In, out, in, out. Thoughts came, but they no longer stayed. They drifted in and passed through like mist. His body rested before he decided to rest it. This startled him. Control had always come first. Now it arrived second. His eyes closed, not deliberately, not completely. The world softened at the edges. He felt himself slip not downward but inward. There was no image, no story, just a sensation of letting go of holding. For the first time, Hypnos did not guide sleep. He followed it. The moment did not last, or perhaps it did. Time behaved strangely there. When his eyes opened again, the night had not moved, but he had. Something remained. A warmth behind the eyes, a looseness in the chest, a faint echo. He realized then that he had dreamed, not as a god, as a human. The dream left no pictures behind, only a feeling. A familiarity, as if he had been somewhere he did not need to remember. This unsettled him and calmed him at the same time. He stood slowly, aware now of the weight in his limbs. The world felt closer, less distant, more forgiving. As he walked, he felt dreams around him respond, not to command, to resonance. In one house, a restless sleeper turned and settled. In another, a dream lengthened instead of breaking. Hypnos did nothing. He did not reach, yet his presence left a trace. Like warmth left behind after a body rises. Night after night, the same pattern returned. Wakefulness, fatigue, stillness, then a soft inward turn, never deep, never complete, but enough to teach him the shape of sleep. He learned its edges, its hesitation, its trust. And slowly, as he learned to rest, the world rested with him. It did not happen suddenly. Hypnos did not decide to sleep. Sleep arrived because he stopped holding himself apart from it. The night was quiet in the way that does not ask questions. No wind, no voices, no movement worth noticing. He lay down without expectation, without preparation. The ground beneath him felt neither hard nor soft. It simply existed. His breathing slowed again, but this time it did not require attention. In, out, in, out. Thoughts appeared and dissolved before they could form words. Images softened before they could take shape. There was no edge to cross, no threshold, just a gradual easing of effort. The world grew distant without moving away, and then Hypnos slept. Not deeply, not lightly, but fully. Time did not pass in the way it used to. It did not stretch. It did not loop. It simply stopped asking to be noticed. Dreams gathered, not as stories, but as warmth, as familiarity, as a sense of being allowed to rest. For the first time, Hypnos did not stand beside sleep. He was within it. He did not guide dreams. They moved around him the way water moves around stone. Some brushed past gently, others lingered. None required direction. And because he was no longer watching, the dreams of others deepened. Somewhere nearby, a sleeper did not wake when they usually would. Elsewhere, a restless mind released its grip and drifted. The effect was not dramatic. It was cumulative, like night settling into its proper weight. When Hypnos stirred, he did not know how long he had been gone. Moments felt misplaced. The sky had changed, but he could not say how. Morning hovered, uncertain. He rose slowly. His body resisted, not from pain, from reluctance. He understood then what humans meant when they said they wanted to stay asleep. Something within him had loosened and did not wish to be retied. As he walked, the world felt quieter than before, not because it was silent, because it was resting. Dreams still moved through houses and streets, but now they moved differently. They lingered. They finished. They did not flee at the first sign of waking. Hypnos felt no triumph, no revelation, only humility. Sleep, he understood at last, was not his domain. It was his teacher, and he was still learning. Night would return. Fatigue would follow. And he would lie down again, not to command, not to observe, but to join. When Hypnos opened his eyes again, the light did not make sense. It was not morning. It was not night. It hovered somewhere in between, as if the world itself had forgotten how long he had been gone. He sat up slowly. The movement felt unfamiliar, as though his body had not expected to be used so soon. There was no urgency, no reason to hurry. Time, he noticed, had loosened its grip. He walked through the quiet streets, trying to measure the hours by ordinary signs. Shadows were too long. Birdsong came late. The air held both cool and warmth. People moved differently, not slower, more gently, as if waking had become a suggestion rather than a demand. Hypnos felt something subtle pull at him. Not fatigue, not quite. A memory of rest. The echo of sleep still settled in his chest, heavy and comforting. He realized then that sleep had left a mark, not on the world on him. He could feel when it approached now, not as an order he issued, but as a tide he recognized. Night returned without ceremony. Hypnos did not resist it. He did not wait until exhaustion forced him down. He chose. He lay down before the weight became unbearable. This choice changed everything. Sleep responded differently when invited. It arrived slower but stayed longer. Dreams gathered again, not urgently, patiently. They sensed his presence but did not cling to it. They flowed, and because he slept willingly, others followed. Across the city, breathing deepened sooner. Fewer people startled awake at the edge of rest. Dreams finished their shapes. Morning came softer. Hypnos began to understand the quiet exchange between waking and sleeping. Neither ruled the other. They took turns. He slept again and again, not every night, but often, enough. Each time the world learned with him. Rest became something shared, not enforced, something chosen, not delivered. Above, the gods felt the shift without naming it. They sensed that sleep had moved beyond their reach, not because it rebelled, because it had grown personal. They did not interfere. They knew better now. Some forces cannot be commanded forever. Below, Hypnos continued to lie down when the night felt right. He did not stay awake to prove anything. He rested to understand. And as he learned, sleep settled more deeply into the world. Not perfectly, not completely, but enough. Enough to soften thought, enough to lengthen dreams, enough to make waking less sharp. Hypnos did not become human, not entirely, but he carried humanity into sleep, and sleep, in return, carried him into its deepest quiet. After a while, Hypnos stopped counting the nights. They arrived whether he marked them or not. Darkness no longer felt like a boundary. It felt like a surface, something he could rest upon without sinking. He learned the signs, the slight dulling of sound, the way distance softened. The moment when effort became unnecessary. He no longer waited until his body failed him. He lay down when the night felt open, sometimes on a narrow bed, sometimes on cool ground, sometimes with nothing beneath him but silence. Each time was different. Each time was the same. Sleep did not always come quickly. Hypnos accepted this. He had learned that patience was part of the offering. He listened to his breath without guiding it. He allowed thoughts to circle until they tired themselves out. This, too, was something humans knew well. Around him, the world adjusted, not dramatically, subtly. Shops closed a little earlier. Lights dimmed a little lower. Voices softened sooner than before. People still worried, still dreamed, still woke too early, but the sharpness had eased. Sleep had found a steadier footing. Hypnos noticed how dreams changed their behavior. They no longer rushed to finish before dawn. They unfolded more slowly, as if confident they would not be interrupted. Some nights he dreamed of nothing at all, just darkness that felt complete. Other nights fragments appeared, water moving without urgency. Hands releasing their grip, a sky without distance. He did not interpret these dreams. He let them pass through him the way sleep now passed. He had stopped trying to understand everything. That, he realized, was the final lesson. Above the sleeping world, the gods felt a deepening calm, not because sleep had grown stronger, because struggle had grown weaker. They sensed Hypnos differently now, closer to the ground, less luminous, more real. They did not speak of it. There was nothing to decide. Below, Hypnos rested again, and again. Each time the world followed a little more easily. Sleep became a habit, not enforced, not feared. A familiar return. And familiarity, more than power, is what allows rest to stay. There came a night when Hypnos did not notice that he was tired. That, more than anything else, told him how far he had come. Fatigue used to arrive like a signal. Clear, demanding. Now it drifted in quietly, blending with the evening until it was indistinguishable from the dark itself. He sat for a while, not because he needed to, but because he liked the feeling of not rushing. The world had slowed its pace around him, not everywhere, but enough. Enough that silence did not feel empty, enough that darkness did not feel unfinished. He lay down without ceremony, no preparation, no expectation. Sleep came when it was ready, sometimes quickly, sometimes not. Hypnos had learned that this no longer mattered. He slept in fragments now, not broken, layered, rest within rest, dream within dream. Sometimes he surfaced briefly, aware of his body, aware of breath, aware of the night holding him. Then he sank again, gently. This kind of sleep felt different from eternity. Eternity had been wide and unchanging. This was narrow, specific, warm, human. Around him, dreams no longer reacted to his presence. They did not gather, they did not hesitate. They behaved as if he were simply another sleeper. This pleased him. It meant his work was done, not because sleep was complete, but because it no longer depended on him. Above the quietened world, the gods sensed this too, not as an ending, as a release. A force that once required balance now balanced itself. They turned their attention elsewhere. There was nothing left to oversee here. Below, Hypnos slept, not as a god guarding the night, but as one being among many who trusted the dark. And in that trust, the nights grew deeper. Not heavier. Deeper. The kind of depth that does not pull you down, the kind that holds. After that, the nights began to blur, not because they were forgotten, but because they no longer demanded to be remembered. Hypnos slept and woke and slept again without marking the passage. Some nights passed with no dreams at all. Others arrived softly layered, like distant echoes that never fully formed. He stopped asking what they meant. Meaning, he learned, kept sleep too alert, so he let go of it. He learned the comfort of returning to the same places. The same narrow room, the same quiet street, the same stretch of darkness where nothing waited. Repetition settled him. Night after night, he lay down at roughly the same hour, sometimes earlier, sometimes later. The difference no longer mattered. Sleep met him wherever he was. He noticed how the world had adjusted to this rhythm. Breathing slowed sooner. Voices faded earlier. Lights lingered less. Not because people were commanded, because they felt safe enough to stop. Hypnos rested among them without distinction. No longer luminous. No longer separate. Just another presence folded into the dark. Some nights he woke briefly without opening his eyes. Aware of weight, of warmth, of the ground holding him. These moments did not alarm him, he let them pass. Sleep returned the way water returns after a stone is dropped, smoothly, without effort. Above, the gods rarely noticed the nights anymore. They sensed continuity, stability, nothing calling for correction. Sleep had become a background truth, like gravity, like time. They turned their attention elsewhere, trusting this part of the world to care for itself. Below, Hypnos rested again, and again, and again. Each repetition made the next one easier, not because sleep grew stronger, because resistance had faded. The night no longer asked to be guided. It carried itself. There were nights when Hypnos could not remember how he had fallen asleep. This did not trouble him. It reassured him. For a long time, sleep had required awareness. Now it happened in the absence of it. He would lie down or sit or simply remain where he was and later find himself waking somewhere else in the night. Sometimes the stars had shifted. Sometimes they had not. The difference felt unimportant. He began to experience what humans rarely notice. The middle of sleep, not the beginning, not the end. The long, quiet stretch where nothing happens and everything rests. In those hours, he felt no identity, no purpose, no responsibility, only weight and warmth and the slow rhythm of breath. This was new. As a god, he had always existed with intention. Now, existence without intention revealed itself as a kind of mercy. Around him, the world continued its quiet adjustment. People slept through sounds that once would have woken them. Dreams no longer startled themselves awake. The night grew thicker, not darker, thicker with rest. Hypnos noticed that he was no longer present in most dreams. They did not need him. They followed their own paths, looping gently, resolving softly. Some faded without meaning. Others lingered just long enough to feel complete. This pleased him. He had not lost his place. He had fulfilled it. There were nights when he slept and slept and slept again, waking only long enough to shift his weight or draw a deeper breath. Then sinking back without resistance. If time passed, it did so quietly. If dawn arrived, it waited. Morning learned patience from sleep. Above, the gods felt no disturbance, no imbalance, no call. Sleep had settled into a self-sustaining rhythm. A force that once needed guidance now moved on its own. They did not mark the moment. There was nothing to record. Below, Hypnos rested once more, and in resting, he allowed the night to be simply what it was. Not a boundary, not a realm, but a long, gentle pause the world returned to again and again and again. Eventually, Hypnos stopped noticing the moment sleep arrived. There was no crossing. No descent, no change worth marking. He would simply be there and then later not be there at all. This absence felt gentle. Unimportant, like forgetting a word you no longer need. The nights grew wide, not long wide. They opened without effort and closed without sound. Hypnos lay within them as one shape among many, no brighter, no heavier, just present. Breathing happened without his attention. Dreams moved without his guidance. Even waking lost its sharp edge. Sometimes his eyes opened and the dark was still complete. Sometimes light had already arrived. He did not ask which it was. The answer no longer changed anything. The world had grown accustomed to resting on its own. Sleep moved through cities like a low tide, not dramatic, reliable. People lay down and did not rehearse tomorrow. Thoughts loosened earlier. Memory softened faster. Rest did not always come easily, but it came eventually, and that was enough. Hypnos felt himself thinning. Not fading, spreading. His presence no longer gathered dreams, it blended with them. If someone sensed calm just before sleep, it was no longer possible to say where it came from. That, he realized, was the final shape of his work. Not to be known, not to be felt, but to be unnecessary. Above, even the gods ceased to distinguish this part of the night. Sleep had become a quiet constant, a background truth, something the world carried without remembering why. Below, Hypnos rested again, and again, and again. Each rest less deliberate than the last, until rest itself was no longer an action but a state the world returned to on its own. For a long while, everything worked. Sleep arrived. Rest stayed. Nights closed gently around the world, so gently that no one thought to question it. Hypnos lay within this balance without weight, without urgency, almost without form. He no longer chose when to sleep. Sleep chose itself. And because of that, something else began to happen, very slowly. So slowly that it felt like nothing at all. Dreams no longer waited. They moved freely, forming and dissolving without hesitation. Most of the time, this was enough. But sometimes, only sometimes, a dream would pause, not break, not vanish, just hesitate. As if searching for something it could not name. Hypnos felt this faintly, like a pressure change, like a room growing slightly emptier without anyone leaving. He did not intervene. He had learned that intervention rewakens effort. So he rested and allowed the night to continue on its own. Across the world, people slept well, better than before, longer, deeper. And yet, in the quietest hours, a few of them stirred. Not awake, not dreaming, suspended. As if their sleep had reached a place where something should have been waiting, but wasn't. Above, the gods noticed this absence before they understood it, not as a failure, as a gap. Something unspoken, something unwritten. They did not move to correct it. They remembered what happened when they interfered too soon, so they waited. Below, Hypnos rested as he always did now. His presence spread thin, woven into habit, into rhythm, into the background of night. He did not see what was forming, not because he was unaware, but because sleep, when complete, does not look ahead. It holds. And in holding, it leaves space. Space for things that have not yet arrived. Space for events that do not come from rest, but from what remains unresolved even after rest is found. Somewhere deep in that space, far from fire and far from sleep, a silence began to gather. Not the silence of night, a different kind, one that belonged to words never spoken, to futures never entered, to names that had been written once and then forgotten. And slowly, without disturbing the sleeping world, that silence waited for its story to be told. In the deepest part of the night, long after fire learned to rest and sleep learned to carry itself, something remained unfinished. It did not wake anyone. It did not disturb dreams. It simply waited. This silence did not belong to darkness. It belonged to absence, to a future that had been prepared but never arrived. Somewhere beyond cities and seasons, beyond even the notice of gods, a prophecy lay untouched, written carefully, spoken once, then set aside. Not destroyed, not denied, just forgotten. The world continued without it. Fields grew, houses aged, people slept. No disaster followed. That was the strangest part. Prophecies are meant to announce themselves through urgency, through fear. This one did not. It remained folded into time, waiting for someone to notice that something expected had not occurred. In a quiet place where no one traveled anymore, there stood an oracle. She did not speak often now. Her voice had grown soft from disuse. She had learned that silence could last longer than truth. She remembered the prophecy clearly, not its words, its shape, the feeling it left behind. A sense of balance that never quite settled. It was meant to speak of a child, not a king, not a conqueror, just a presence, someone whose arrival would have closed a circle. But the circle remained open. The oracle had said nothing, not out of fear, not out of defiance, out of restraint. She had felt the weight of the world already heavy with fire and sleep. She had chosen to wait, and so the child was never born. No name was given, no cradle prepared, no future unfolded. Yet the prophecy remained, waiting in the quiet, waiting for the moment when the world, rested and unguarded, might finally be ready to notice what it was missing. And in that gentle awareness, without alarm, without demand, the story of the one who never lived began at last. Long before anyone noticed that something was missing, the prophecy had already been written, not in fire, not in stone, in rhythm, in the slow movement of time toward an expected moment. It spoke of a child who would arrive quietly. No trumpet, no sign. Just a shift that would make the world feel complete. The words were simple, almost gentle. That was why they were dangerous. The oracle remembered the night the prophecy first reached her. The air had been still, not heavy, still in the way that asks for listening. She had not been afraid. Fear announces itself. This had felt like patience. She spoke the words once to the empty chamber. Then she stopped, because even as she spoke, she felt the weight of them settle into the world too soon. The future leaned forward, too eagerly. She had seen this before. Prophecies, when rushed, bend the world around themselves. She chose restraint. She let the words fade. Time moved on as if nothing had happened. Years passed, seasons layered. The place where the child should have been born became an ordinary house. Walls, roof, silence, no one suspected. That was the gift. That was the cost. Somewhere within time, a path remained unused, not erased. Unused, it waited. And because it waited, the world grew used to its absence. People found other balances. Fire softened. Sleep deepened. Life continued without catastrophe. This troubled the oracle, not because disaster failed to arrive, but because balance felt incomplete, like a breath never fully released. At night, she dreamed of footsteps that never reached the door, of names spoken once and then forgotten. She woke without knowing why her chest felt lighter and heavier at the same time. Above, the gods sensed the delay, not as defiance, as uncertainty. They had seen many futures. They knew that some only exist if named. They said nothing. Silence had taught them the value of waiting. Below, the world slept with growing ease. But ease, when unexamined, leaves space. Space for something that was meant to arrive to remain absent. And in that absence, the prophecy waited, not impatient, not fading, simply folded into the quiet. If the child had been born, nothing remarkable would have happened at first. That was always part of the prophecy. No light in the sky, no change in the wind, just a cry in the night, quickly softened by sleep. The house would have been small, quiet, the kind of place that learns patience before joy. The child would have grown slowly, not stronger than others, not faster, just steady. Years would have passed without announcement. Seasons would have returned to the same fields. The child would have learned the weight of ordinary days, how time stretches in the afternoon, how darkness gathers early in winter, how sleep comes easier when nothing is demanded of you. But the child was never born, and so this life remained folded, not lost, waiting. The oracle sometimes sensed it like a second rhythm beneath the one she lived in, a pulse that did not belong to the present. She would pause mid-step, feeling that something should have reached this moment but had not. She did not regret her choice. Regret is too loud. What she felt was awareness. The knowledge that restraint always leaves an echo. The gods felt it too. They noticed how time curved slightly around an empty center, not broken, just open. They remembered other prophecies that had demanded fulfillment. Those had ended in fire, in urgency, in endings that arrived before the world was ready. This one had waited, and because it waited, the world softened. Fire learned to rest. Sleep learned to deepen. The absence did not weaken life, it made it gentler. Still, gentleness is not completion. The unused future remained like a door that was never opened but never locked. Time passed through it without entering. Sometimes people dreamed of paths they did not take, not with regret, with curiosity. Dreams of walking towards something that dissolved before it was reached. They woke calm, untroubled, unaware that they had brushed against the edge of a life that never unfolded. The oracle aged. Her voice softened further. She spoke less, not because she forgot, because remembering kept the future awake. At night, she would sit and listen to the quiet. Not for voices, for balance. She understood now that some prophecies are not meant to arrive. They exist to hold space, to prevent other futures from rushing in too quickly, to give the world room to breathe. And yet, even space, when held too long, begins to ask a question, not aloud, but gently. Is this enough? The question did not demand an answer. It simply remained, waiting, like the child, like the future, like the moment just before sleep when the mind loosens but has not yet let go. And in that long pause where nothing happened and everything rested, the prophecy continued to exist, unspoken, unfulfilled, but not forgotten, not entirely. Time, having nothing specific to fulfill, began to move differently. Not slower, not faster. Looser. Years passed without gathering around a single point. They spread instead, touching many lives lightly, leaving no deep mark. If the child had lived, there would have been moments that shaped him. A first loss, a long walk, a quiet decision that felt insignificant at the time. These moments never occurred. But their absence still occupied space. The world adjusted. People learned to live without expecting resolution. Stories did not always close. Some questions remained softly unanswered, and that became normal. The oracle noticed this most clearly in the way people listened. They no longer leaned forward when she spoke. They listened without urgency, as if they understood without being told that not every future needed to arrive. This was new and strangely peaceful. The gods observed this shift with quiet attention. They had once believed that balance required completion. Now they saw another truth. Balance could also be held by restraint, by leaving certain paths untouched. They did not name this choice. Naming creates responsibility. Instead, they allowed time to continue its gentle widening. Dreams changed. They became less narrative, less driven. People dreamed of landscapes without destinations, of walking without needing to arrive. They woke rested. This pleased Hypnos, even from where he now rested without identity. Sleep carried these dreams easily. It did not try to interpret them. It let them pass. Somewhere in this loosened time, the unused life remained. Not aging, not waiting impatiently, simply existing as potential, like a note never played but still present in the silence. Occasionally, a child would pause and feel a sense of familiarity with nothing in particular. A feeling of having almost known something important. The feeling passed. It always did. No harm came of it. This, too, was part of the balance. The oracle, now very old, sat one final evening without expectation. She did not look for visions. She did not ask questions. She listened to the world breathing. She felt no regret. Only completion of a different kind. She understood now that the prophecy had done exactly what it was meant to do, not by arriving, but by not arriving. It had softened the future. It had slowed the world just enough. As night settled, she closed her eyes, not to sleep, just to rest, and the prophecy, still unspoken, rested with her, carried forward by time itself. There was a house that never mattered. It was not marked, not remembered. It stood where many houses stood, built with no expectation beyond shelter. If the child had been born, this might have been the place, or somewhere like it. The difference was small. The house aged quietly, wood softened, stone cooled. People came and went. None of them stayed long enough to leave a trace worth naming. At night, the house held sleep without question. Dreams passed through its rooms like slow air. Nothing gathered, nothing resisted. Sometimes a single light remained on longer than it should have, not from worry, from forgetting. A chair sat empty. A cup cooled. Ordinary moments filled the space where prophecy might have arrived. The house never noticed what it was missing. That was its gift. Outside, seasons overlapped gently. Spring arrived before winter had fully released its hold. Summer lingered into days meant for harvest. Autumn slowed everything without announcing itself. Snow came late and left early. Time was not confused. It was unhurried. Inside the house, someone slept. Just one person. Their breathing steady, unaware. They did not dream of heroes. They did not dream of futures. They dreamed of nothing that required attention. This mattered more than anyone realized. The gods sensed this house only because it asked for nothing. No correction, no completion, no fulfillment. It existed comfortably within the gap. The prophecy rested easily here, not as words, as absence, as the space between what happens and what might have. The sleeper shifted once, pulled a blanket closer. The house adjusted. The night continued. Nothing arrived. Nothing needed to. And in that quiet continuity, the world remained balanced. Not because everything was complete, but because nothing insisted on being fulfilled. After the oracle was gone, nothing changed. This, too, was expected. No wind rose. No sign appeared. The place where she had lived settled into quiet the way places always do when they are no longer needed. Dust learned the shape of stillness. Time passed through gently, without stopping. The prophecy did not follow her. It had never belonged to her alone. It remained where it always had, within the structure of time itself, folded between moments that never asked to be connected. People continued their lives without sensing loss. Children were born. Others grew old. Some left. Some stayed. Nothing pointed toward what had not happened. And yet the silence she left behind did not collapse. It stayed. It learned how to exist without explanation. This silence was not empty. It was full of restraint, of futures that had been considered and gently declined. In the long nights that followed, sleep deepened further, not heavier, wider. Dreams became softer around the edges. They did not rush toward meaning. They drifted. People woke feeling rested without knowing why. This unsettled no one. Comfort rarely does. Time, relieved of expectation, began to repeat itself with small variations. A season arrived slightly early. Another lingered longer than planned. These changes caused no harm. They were absorbed easily. The world had learned flexibility from the absence it carried. If the child had lived, there would have been a moment when everything turned. A decision, a recognition. That moment never came, and so no turning was required. History flowed around the empty center without resistance. The gods observed this from a distance they rarely used. They did not speak of it. Speech sharpens attention. They felt the absence instead as a gentle pressure holding the world open. This future, unfulfilled, had become a stabilizing force, not by acting, by remaining still. Somewhere far from oracles and gods, a person paused while performing a task too ordinary to remember. They felt calm, not joy, not insight, just calm. They continued. This happened often. It happened everywhere. The prophecy moved through the world this way now. Not as words, as ease, as the lack of urgency at the edge of thought. Night after night, the same house slept. Other houses slept too. Cities breathed slowly. Fields rested between harvests. Time passed without leaning forward. And within this sustained quiet, the story of the one who was never born continued to exist. Not as a narrative, as a condition, a softness in the shape of history, a pause that never needed to end. For a long time, the world existed without expecting anything from itself. Days followed nights without leaning toward significance. Morning arrived not as a beginning, but as a continuation. People woke already mid-breath, already within their lives. No moment waited to be named. This did not make the world smaller. It made it lighter. Time learned to move without gathering weight. Years passed without being counted. They folded into one another, soft at the edges. Memory adjusted. People remembered feelings more than events. The warmth of a room, the quiet of early evening, the sense that things were, for the most part, acceptable. The prophecy rested within this texture, not as a destination, as a release from destination. It had once been meant to close a circle. Now it held the circle open, wide enough for life to move freely inside it. The gods no longer tracked this future. They could not. It had dispersed. There was no single thread to follow. No child. No turning point. Only a continuous present softly influenced by what had not occurred. This unsettled none of them. They had learned that not all power announces itself. Some power stabilizes by dissolving. Night after night, sleep arrived without ceremony. Dreams did not hurry toward resolution. They wandered. People woke rested even when nothing in particular had been resolved. This was new, and it held. Somewhere a person lay awake briefly and felt no urgency to think. Thoughts passed like distant weather. Sleep returned without effort. This, too, was part of the balance left behind by the unfulfilled prophecy. Time no longer rushed toward climax. It expanded outward instead, touching countless ordinary lives without asking them to participate in meaning. The world had learned how to continue without needing a rival, and in this continuation, the prophecy remained. Not waiting, not fading, simply present as the quiet permission for things to be enough. Over time, the absence stopped feeling like an absence. It became a texture, something woven into days so gently that no one remembered what it had replaced. The world had learned how to move without anticipation. Morning light entered rooms without announcing purpose. People rose, not because something awaited them, but because waking had become a rhythm. They moved through familiar spaces, performed familiar actions, and felt no pressure to mark the day as meaningful. Meaning had loosened its grip. This did not empty life. It softened it. Time passed in long, even stretches. Weeks blended into months without tension. Years arrived without ceremony. No moment gathered the weight of destiny, and so none of them collapsed under it. The prophecy remained exactly where it had always been, not ahead, not behind, within. It existed as a quiet allowance, permission for the world to continue without correction. If the child had been born, there would have been a moment when everything narrowed. Attention would have focused. History would have leaned inward. That narrowing never came. Instead, the world widened. Lives unfolded without convergence. Paths crossed briefly, then separated again. Nothing demanded permanence. People loved, not because love would change the world, but because it made the present easier to inhabit. Loss occurred, but it did not fracture time. It was absorbed. The gods noticed this absorption with something like respect. They had once believed that futures required anchors, that without fulfillment, time would unravel. They were wrong. Time, relieved of expectation, became resilient. It bent. It adapted. It held. They no longer looked for the child. There was no single place where absence lived. It had spread evenly. Night carried this balance effortlessly. Sleep moved through bodies like a remembered gesture. People lay down without rehearsing tomorrow. Dreams wandered without obligation. Some nights held images. Others held nothing at all. Both were sufficient. In quiet homes, lamps were turned off one by one. Rooms darkened. Breathing slowed. The world entered rest without needing to be guided. Hypnos, now indistinguishable from habit, rested everywhere and nowhere at once. The prophecy rested too. It did not speak. It did not call. It did not insist. It simply remained as a space where urgency had once tried to form and then dissolved. Occasionally, someone felt the edge of this space. A pause in thought, a hesitation without anxiety, a sense that nothing needed to be decided right now. These moments passed quietly. They left no mark. They required no explanation. Time continued, not toward resolution, but outward. Across fields, through cities, into nights that repeated themselves with small, harmless variations. The world did not arrive anywhere new, and because of that, it did not leave itself behind. The prophecy, never fulfilled, had become a kind of rest, not an ending, not a beginning, a sustained middle, a long, uninterrupted place where nothing demanded arrival and nothing insisted on being born. And within this long continuation, the story remained alive, not as an event, but as a condition the world now knew how to carry. Time discovered that it could repeat itself without becoming trapped. This was new. Before, repetition had been a sign of delay, a future waiting to arrive. Now, repetition became rest. Days returned not as copies, but as familiar shapes with softened edges. Morning light fell across the same surfaces again and again, never exactly the same, never demanding attention. People moved through these days with a growing sense that nothing was urgent. This did not slow them. It steadied them. The prophecy settled deeper into this pattern, not ahead of time. Within it, it existed as a quiet allowance for things to return without apology. Seasons overlapped gently. Spring did not fully replace winter. Summer lingered without urgency. Autumn softened what remained. Snow arrived when it wished and left without ceremony. The world did not correct this. It adapted. People adjusted their rhythms without complaint. They slept when tired. They rested when they could. Sleep no longer prepared anyone for a moment that awaited them. It simply carried them through. Dreams reflected this change. They circled familiar places. Paths looped. Rooms returned. There was no fear in this, only recognition. Some dreams repeated themselves so often that they lost narrative entirely. They became textures, colors, movements without destination. These dreams did not disturb rest. They deepened it. The gods watched this pattern expand beyond their expectations. They could no longer point to where the prophecy should have acted. It had diffused, spread evenly. Time itself now carried the balance that prophecy once held alone. They felt no need to intervene. Intervention sharpens edges. This future had no edges left to sharpen. Night after night, the world entered the same pause. Cities dimmed, fields quieted, homes settled. Breathing slowed everywhere at once. There was no signal, no instruction. Rest arrived because rest had become the easiest option. The absence of the child was no longer noticeable. It had been absorbed completely into the shape of living. No one asked what might have been. Curiosity had nothing to attach itself to. The prophecy, once meant to guide history, now guided nothing. And yet, everything moved more gently because of it. Time continued to repeat without exhausting itself. It did not build toward climax. It did not collapse into stasis. It flowed. And within this flow, the long continuation of what never began held the world steady. Again, and again, and again. On a night that did not know it was any different from the others, the world rested in many places at once. In one city, a streetlight flickered and then steadied itself. No one noticed. Windows remained dark. Sleep held. In another place, far from streets and names, wind passed through tall grass slowly enough that each blade moved as if deciding for itself. Animals rested without listening. Nothing hunted. Nothing fled. The night asked for nothing. In a small house near water, someone turned in their sleep. A dream loosened its grip and drifted away. They did not wake. Their breathing adjusted and found its rhythm again. Elsewhere, a ship moved across dark water. No one aboard thought of destination. The movement itself was enough. The prophecy rested within all of this. Not present, distributed. It did not belong to any single place. It existed as the shared quality of these moments. The ease, the lack of insistence, the sense that nothing was about to happen. Time flowed through the night without collecting meaning. Hours passed without being counted. In a distant city, a clock struck an hour that no one heard. The sound faded before it mattered. Sleep did not adjust itself around the noise. It absorbed it. Dreams continued as if uninterrupted. In a room with no memory, someone dreamed of walking. No destination, just motion. The dream repeated itself with small variations. Each repetition felt more familiar, more calming. The gods felt this night only as a smooth surface. No ripples, no tension. They did not look closer. There was nothing to focus on. This was the world carrying itself. The absence of the child no longer existed as an idea. It existed as a condition that made nights like this possible. Without arrival, nothing waited. Without waiting, nothing rushed. Without rushing, everything rested. Time repeated the night in many forms, different places, same stillness. The repetition did not weaken it, it deepened it. As dawn approached, light gathered carefully. It did not break the night, it eased into it. Sleep released its hold without resistance. People woke without remembering why they had rested so well. They moved on. The prophecy remained, not behind them, not ahead, around them, like air, like quiet. Like the space between one breath and the next. In the end, nothing arrived. And because of that, nothing needed to end. The world continued the way it had learned to, not with certainty, not with answers, with ease. Fire stayed where it belonged, warm but contained. Sleep moved freely, without instruction, without guardianship. Time unfolded without leaning toward resolution. The prophecy rested exactly where it always had, not in the future, not in the past, but in the space that allowed both to exist without pressure. There was no moment when the world noticed it was complete. Completion is too loud. Instead, there was a long understanding that nothing essential was missing. Lives continued without converging. Stories began and drifted and sometimes faded without needing to close. People slept. They woke. They returned to sleep again. Night after night, this rhythm held. The gods no longer searched. There was nothing to find. Balance had taken a quieter form, not the balance of forces, but the balance of permission. Permission to rest. Permission to continue. Permission to leave some futures unlived. The house near the water stood as it always had. Lights went out. Breathing slowed. Outside, the seasons prepared to repeat themselves once more, not perfectly, gently. Somewhere within time, the life that never began remained folded, not waiting, not grieving, simply present as the reason the world never needed to hurry. And so the night deepened, not darker, deeper, holding everything without asking for anything in return. If you listen closely, there is no ending here, only continuation, only rest, only the quiet knowledge that nothing more needs to happen right now. And in that knowing, the story remains not as something to remember, but as something you can finally let go of. If this story helps you rest, you're welcome to return again.